Hey everybody, I've been having some trouble with my Rigidbody FPS controller as far as not having it work properly. And you may or may not be having the same problem. Maybe it just depends on the version of Unity that you have installed and maybe your system. But I'm going to go ahead and start drag one of these into my scene from scratch. I already have one in here that I was working with and I made some modifications to, and I currently have it turned off. So I'm just going to start from scratch so that you can see the trouble that I've been having with this, and maybe you've been having some of the same trouble too. Once we take a look at the difficulties, I'm going to offer a few solutions that hopefully will work for you. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag that Rigidbody FPS controller into the scene, and that's the one that's found in the standard assets package. So if we're under first person character and we go to prefabs, we want to drag the Rigidbody FPS controller into the scene. Now the reason we need the rigid body is so that we're able to pick up, quote unquote, pick up some objects and we can add or subtract to our health. So adding a rigid body component to the regular FPS controller is something that I've tried and it just doesn't seem to work. Starting with the rigid body FPS controller, I drag that into my scene, and when I drag it in, if we zoom way out, I'm like, where is it? It's all the way out here at position 000. So I left my old one that I already had located where I want on my island, and what I'm going to do, an easy way for me to position my new one is to select my older one and go to position component or the transform component and click on position and right click and choose copy, and then select my new controller and go to position and then right click and choose paste, and now that picks up the exact XYZ coordinates of my original controller. So now I'm kind of starting from the same point. So let's take a look in preview and just see what's happening. If I just go ahead and hit preview, oops, let me turn off my audio source. So turn off that music. All right, so if we're in preview, I can control this as normal, so I can go forward, backward, left, right. I can jump, I can run. So it seems to be working just fine. Oh, another thing too is I've got these objects placed in here, and you can see I've got my my player health score. And if I run into, let's say, this barrel, it's working. You can see my score changing. So the rigid body component on this is working properly. The problem I'm having is that this is a really short player. By default, the scale is one unit on the XYZ axis. And the y-axis we can think of as height, and 1 unit in Playmaker in Unity is equivalent to about 3 feet of height in the real world. So if I want this to be a taller character, like let's say about 6 feet high, I want to change the y scale to 2. Which the regular FPS controller without the rigid body on it, that wasn't a problem. But now when I do this, I change the scale to 2. Oops, I'm sorry, I'm in the audio. Let's go back to selecting the rigid body controller. Let's scale that to 2. All right, and then let's go ahead and hit preview again. And now, for some reason, my controller, I cannot control it. It's sliding down the hill. It's just sliding around as if it's on ice. So this is just kind of a big problem. So I experimented with some things to do that might fix this. One thing I did was under the capsule collider where it says 0 friction, I tried to make that give it a character material, which gives it a little bit of friction. And if I do that and hit preview, let's see what happens. Okay, it seems to stay in place. It's not sliding around. But if I'm using my keys to try to control this, move it forward, backward, left, right, nothing is happening. I'm not able to control it. I'm not able to jump. I'm not able to do anything. I can just sort of, rotate my head or whatever. So that that isn't really a fix. So I kind of hit upon this thing called air control, and if I check this, and now I hit preview, okay, now I can move things left, right, forward, backward, but it seems to have it seems to be ignoring maybe the character material that kind of is gliding around. And the other problem is that if I want to jump by hitting the space bar, it doesn't work anymore. If I want to try to run by hitting tab and like W to go forward, it's not working. So it's losing some functionality, and I don't think that's really what we want. So I haven't found a solution for this as far as fixing this particular asset. It just seems to be some sort of a bug where it just isn't working. So I do have an alternative solution for you if you want to try that, and if you're having these same problem. The solution that I found, if you're having the same issues with this Rigidbody FPS controller that I am, is to just use a different asset. So I'm going to remove my my controller that I was just working with. I'm leaving my original in there turned off again. If you go to the Unity Asset Store and you find a package called Starter Assets First Person Controller, download that. It's a free asset. Import it into your scene, and it will appear in your assets folder. And let's find that. Here's Starter Assets. We want, under First Person Controller, we want prefabs, and we want the object called Nested Parent Unpack. This is a prefab. Now we can drag this into our scene, and if we double click on this object, we can see it's kind of strange. It's got this GUI attached to it, and that we need to remove that. So we're not going to use this GUI, this graphic user interface that is sort of a default that comes with it. So we need to get rid of that. And what we're going to do is, in our game object, we can go ahead and unfold that so we can see what's inside. And we can see this UI object, which is a user interface. And we'll just go ahead and delete these. Now what happens when we say to delete this, it's saying, you've got to actually delete this from the original prefab object. So let's go ahead and do that. What it's going to do is open the prefab. It's going to have us just delete that from the prefab. And then let's go back to our scene. So now we have this thing called Nested Parent Unpack. It doesn't have that GUI attached to it. And let's try to get this into position. So again, I'm going to copy the location or the coordinates from my original game controller and paste those into this new one. All right, and that doesn't quite get us, it doesn't quite get us into the right position, but I'll go ahead and manually we can go ahead and move this to where we want it. All right, so as we're positioning this, we might also want to rotate it to adjust our camera view. So right now my camera is looking out into kind of nowhere, and I want to face my pickup objects here. So I'm just going to make sure that I select the parent of the camera, and we can go ahead and rotate that camera view. So we can make adjustments until it's what we want as far as position and rotation. All right, so now I have it about where I want. I've got it facing the direction that I want to face and located about where it is. So let's go ahead and just test this out. I'm going to hit preview. All right, and if I move forward, backward, side to side, I jump, I can run. So things are looking pretty good. I want to see if this will, if I run over one of these pickup objects, it'll change the score. It is not working, so why isn't it working? Let's take a look. All right, so under, let's go ahead and change the name of this first of all, nested parent unpack. We can call it Rigidbody controller, FPS controller. All right, and let's to the player capsule. What we need is, we need a rigid body component. So let's add the rigid body component. And let's go ahead and freeze the rotation, X, Y, Z. And now let's give it a try. All right, here we are. Let's see if I can pick up these objects. Yep. So when I run into these, my score is changing. I run into the barrels, my score is increasing. I run into these skulls, it's decreasing. So everything's working properly. So it's really important that you select the player capsule and you add the rigid body component, and then make sure you freeze XYZ rotation. All right, the next thing we can do also is here, we want to make our component taller. Again, it comes in as a scale by default at a XYZ scale of 1. Let's go ahead and change it to 2 because that's what we really want as a taller player. And let's preview that again and see if everything works okay. Yep. Right. I think when I need to adjust something so that when I start I'm not looking at the ground, but it seems to be working okay. Let's try to pick up one of these barrels. Yep. So my score is increasing and decreasing when I pick up these various components, and everything seems to be working. I'm going to need to change the angle of my camera, I think, to look higher up maybe. But I'm able to jump. I'm able to run. Okay, so I think this will work out fairly well if you're having trouble with the standard assets rigid body controller.